This is my true story. My son thought his strength made him king of the house I built with my own hands. One evening, in front of his wife, he raised his hand against me. Not once, not twice, but 20 times. Each slap was met with her smirk, her quiet laugh, as though I were nothing but a joke. I stayed silent. I counted every strike. My cheeks burned, but my resolve froze cold. He thought he had humiliated me. He didn't know I still held the deed. Before I tell you what I did, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe so more people hear my story. I remember the beginning like it was yesterday. He was just a boy with scraped knees, chasing a ball down the street, looking up to me with eyes that believed I could build anything. And maybe I could. I taught him how to swing a hammer, how to measure a line straight, how to cut wood so it fit flush. We worked side by side when he was young, small hands trying to copy mine, proud when he managed to drive a nail in without bending it. Those were the moments I thought would shape him into a man who respected effort, who respected sacrifice. When he grew older, I signed the papers for the house he would live in. The bank wanted a guarantor, someone with history, someone with trust. That was me. I scraped and I saved. I went without new shoes some winters, patched holes in my boots, and worked overtime shifts so the family could have more than I ever had. I signed the mortgage papers with a steady hand, never imagining those same hands would one day be struck by him. At the time, all I felt was pride. Pride that he had a roof over his head, pride that my son could live in comfort while I carried the weight. I gave him the house not just as a shelter, but as a symbol, a place to raise children, a place to build dinners and laughter, a place to show the world that our family stood strong. That house was not just wood and brick. It was blood and sweat pressed into walls. It was the hours I spent under sun and rain. It was my gift, the kind a father gives without question. For years I walked by it with quiet satisfaction. When I saw the lights on at night, I thought, my son is safe. When I saw him mowing the lawn, I thought, my son is steady. When I saw his wife smiling at the door, I thought, my son has found his life. And I believed, foolishly perhaps, that gratitude was hidden somewhere in his chest, even if he never said it aloud. But the truth grew heavier with time. The house that was supposed to be a gift became my grief. He forgot where it came from. He forgot whose signature opened the door. He forgot the hours that built the walls. He began to speak as if it were all his doing, as if my hands had never touched the foundation. The gratitude I once imagined hardened into arrogance, and arrogance turned into cruelty. Still, I stayed silent. A father hopes. A father excuses. A father believes the best, even when the truth is sharp. I told myself he was just young, just proud, just finding his way. I told myself respect would come back with time. I told myself patience was the cure. But patience became the rope around my own throat. I gave him everything. And one night, in front of his wife, he repaid my gift with 20 slaps. As my face burned, I remembered the hammer in his small hand, the boy who once looked up to me, the house I gave him, the papers I signed, the meals I skipped, the hours I worked. And the grief that started with sacrifice ended that night in humiliation. The gift I gave had grown into grief, and grief had turned into rage colder than winter's steel. It did not start with fists. It never starts that way. It began with words, sharp and careless, like little knives tossed across the table. His wife laughed at every jab. She poured his drink and leaned close, and he grew bolder with each sip. "Old man," he called me. "Dead weight." I sat quiet, the food in front of me untouched, my hands resting on the table. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself to breathe. But then came the shove. His hand pushed my shoulder back, not hard enough to throw me down, but hard enough for the room to laugh. And when laughter comes, cruelty finds its courage. He slapped me once. The sound was sharp, quick, and I felt the sting on my cheek. Before I could move, he slapped me again. The second one hurt more, not because of the force, but because of the shame. His wife covered her mouth with her hand and laughed behind it, pretending to be shocked but loving every second. He looked around the room, proud, as if striking me made him bigger. The count grew. 3, 4, 5. Each slap came with a word, a curse, an insult. 6, 7, 8. My face burned hot, my eyes watered, but I refused to cry. 9, 10, 11. The room blurred, not from the force, but from the humiliation pressing down on me. 12, 13, 14. His hand grew tired before his pride did. 15, 16, 17. My ears rang, my skin swelled, but still I sat. 18, 19, 20. When the last one fell, the room was silent for a breath, and then his wife clapped her hands together as if it were a show. My chest rose and fell, slow and heavy. I could taste blood in my mouth, but I swallowed it. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me spit. My hands stayed folded in my lap, my back stayed straight. I would not raise my voice. I would not strike back. I sat still and silent while they laughed. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my stillness meant defeat. But what they did not see was the fire in my chest turning to ice. That hour, that ugly hour, was the longest of my life. Every slap was not just skin on skin. It was a memory erased. It was respect destroyed. It was 30 years of sacrifice spat on the floor. He did not just hit me 20 times. He hit every nail I drove, every dollar I saved, every hour I worked. And when it was over, I rose from the table, nodded once, and walked out the door. No shouting, no begging, just silence. But in that silence, a decision began to form. The slaps ended that night, but the shame did not. Bruises fade, swelling goes down, but humiliation does not heal with time. It follows you, it clings to you, it waits in every corner of the street. The next morning when I stepped outside, I saw neighbors standing on their porches. They looked at me, then looked away too quickly. Some shook their heads, some whispered. The sound of my humiliation had traveled faster than the morning wind. I pulled my old coat tighter around me, not because I was cold, but because I felt stripped bare. His wife made sure of it. She had pulled out her phone that night, smiling at the camera as if it was a party. A video here, a picture there, a caption written with smugness. "Respect your elders?" "Not in this house," she laughed when she posted it. Her friends laughed in the comments. By morning, more people had seen it than I ever wished would. What happened inside those walls had spilled out into the street, and the street carried it further than any fist could reach. The house I built, the one I signed for, the one I gave him, became a stage for my degradation. Once, that home was my pride. Now, it was my prison. Every brick that stood strong now mocked me. Every wall that once sheltered me now felt like it trapped me in shame. I could feel the weight of the roof pressing down on my shoulders, heavier than any hammer I ever swung. Neighbors who used to nod politely stopped coming by. Friends who once visited found excuses to stay away. Even family members spoke to me differently. Their voices carried pity, not respect. Their eyes held shame, not warmth. It was not just the slaps, it was the public knowing. It was the fact that what should have been private, what should never have happened at all, was now common knowledge. And I wore it on my face each time I walked outside. I heard children whispering as I passed. I heard adults lower their voices when I drew near. The sting of his hand had faded from my cheek, but the sting of their whispers lived fresh in my ears. I felt like a man stripped of his place. The father who built, the father who gave, the father who sacrificed, gone. Replaced by the old man who had been slapped 20 times by his own son. That was my name now. That was my title. That was what they thought of me. Inside, the silence was worse. He walked through the house as though nothing had happened. His wife smiled at him and brushed past me like I was nothing more than furniture. They laughed together in the kitchen, the sound carrying down the hall, filling the home with a joy that cut me deeper than the slaps ever did. They acted as though my pain was a joke, a story to share, a thing to be proud of. I could hear them through the walls, their laughter louder than any storm. That house, the one I gave, had turned against me. It no longer felt like home. It felt like proof of my own foolishness. Proof that I had given too much. Proof that I had trusted too blindly. Proof that I had mistaken arrogance for strength. And as the days passed, the shame grew, not smaller. Each whisper, each laugh, each glance added weight to my chest. But shame has two faces. One is pain. The other is clarity. And as I carried the first, the second began to grow. They had turned my gift into a stage. They had turned my silence into a joke. They had turned my dignity into ashes. But they had forgotten one thing: the papers, the deed, the title. The house he thought was his kingdom was still mine on paper. He had mocked me inside walls I still controlled. And as the world laughed, I began to plan. That night, when the house grew quiet, I did not sleep. I sat at the old wooden table with only a lamp burning. The light was soft, yellow against the walls, but my heart was hard and cold. I pulled the shoebox from under my bed. It was the same shoebox I had kept for decades, filled with the papers of my life. Old letters, old receipts, but most important, the deeds and titles. I placed them on the table, one by one, and spread them out like cards in a game. My hands trembled, but not from fear. They trembled from the weight of what I held. There it was, the title of the house. His house. The one he bragged about, the one he slapped me inside of, the one his wife laughed in. I stared at the paper for a long time. His name was not on it. Mine was. He thought it belonged to him, but the law said otherwise. The mortgage was mine. The guarantee was mine. The property was mine. The same hands he struck were the same hands that still owned every brick of the house he walked through. I thought back to the day I signed those papers. I had stood tall then, proud to give him something I never had. I believed I was building his future. I believed I was giving him stability. But looking at the title now, I saw it differently. It was not a gift anymore. It was a chain. A chain he had wrapped around my neck, tightening with each slap, each insult, each smirk from his wife. But chains can be broken. And I realized that night I held the key. I sat for hours, reading every line of the papers. My eyes followed the words slowly, carefully. I wanted no mistake. I wanted no doubt. Every clause, every signature, every stamp reminded me that the house was mine, not his. My heart steadied with each word. The law was on my side. The world had mocked me, but the law would not. The law would listen to my ink the way it listened to my son's laughter. And that gave me strength. I closed the shoebox, placed the title on top, and rested my hand on it. My fingers pressed into the paper until I could feel my pulse in them. For the first time since the slaps, I did not feel powerless. I felt control returning, slow and quiet, like water filling an empty cup. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had stripped me of dignity. They thought they had turned me into nothing but a joke. But in that moment, looking at the title, I knew something they did not know. The joke was theirs. The papers were not just words on a page. They were weapons sharper than fists. They were hammers heavier than hands. My son had forgotten who signed his life into existence. He had forgotten who placed the roof over his head. He had forgotten that the same old man he slapped 20 times was the same old man the law still recognized as the true owner of his world. And that night, I remembered. I folded the title carefully, slid it back into the shoebox, and closed the lid. My decision was not loud. It was not fiery. It was not rushed. It was cold, like ice forming on a still pond. Tomorrow, I would act. Tomorrow, I would remind him of the truth. The house he thought was his was still mine, and I would take it back. When the shoebox was back under my bed and the lamp turned low, I sat in the dark and thought of all the choices I had. I could have screamed that night when his hand struck me. I could have called the police. I could have run to neighbors, shown them the bruises, begged for their help. But noise does not build respect. Screaming does not repair dignity. The louder a man fights, the smaller he looks when no one listens. I had been made small once at that table, in front of his wife, in front of their laughter. I would not be made small again. So I chose silence. Silence is colder. Silence lasts longer. Silence does not fade like a bruise. My son thought his fists made him powerful. His wife thought her smirk made her clever. But neither of them knew the weight of paper. Neither of them knew how cold and sharp a signature could be. They had mocked me on floors I built, under a roof I paid for, inside walls that bore my name. If my humiliation happened there, then my revenge would happen there too. I thought of the house itself. Every nail I hammered, every beam I lifted, every shingle I placed, it was all work meant for his comfort. And he turned that gift into a stage for violence. The thought burned me at first. Then it froze. My decision came like winter, slow, steady, without mercy. Winter does not shout when it takes the land. It creeps in, covers everything, and leaves nothing untouched. That was how I would answer him. I could see it already. The look on his face when he returned home and found his life gone. The anger in his voice when the locks no longer opened for him. The confusion in his wife's eyes when furniture was carried out, when strangers walked through her kitchen, when the world they built on my back crumbled into dust. They would know then what they refused to know before. The hand that gives can also take away. My decision was not revenge for the pain in my cheek. That would heal. My decision was for the dignity they had tried to steal. A father can forgive a mistake. A father can forgive pride. But a father cannot forgive 20 slaps, and the laughter of a wife who clapped while it happened. That was not just cruelty, that was contempt. And contempt deserves consequence. So I decided. I would sell the house. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. I would not warn him. I would not speak of it. I would not give him the chance to beg, to promise, to lie. He would go to work, believing his world was secure, believing his kingdom stood strong. And while he worked, that world would collapse quietly, piece by piece, under the stroke of a pen. I leaned back in my chair and breathed deep. The night outside was cold, but I felt colder. My heart was no longer heavy with shame, it was steady with purpose. That is when I knew my choice was final. Like winter, it would not be stopped. Tomorrow, I would walk into my lawyer's office, place the title on his desk, and start the quiet storm that would strip my son of the house he thought was his. The slaps were his gift to me. The silence afterward was mine to him. But the house was mine to take. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still. The air was sharp and cold. I put on the same coat he once mocked, brushed the dust from my shoes, and tucked the shoebox under my arm. My steps were slow but steady as I walked down the street. Each crunch of gravel under my feet felt like a drumbeat in my chest. I was not walking to work. I was not walking to beg. I was walking to reclaim what was mine. At the lawyer's office, the heat from the radiator filled the room, but I still felt the cold of my resolve. The lawyer was a man I had known for years. He looked at me, then at the box, and said softly, "What brings you in today?" I did not tell him the story of slaps or humiliation. That was not needed. I told him only the facts that mattered. "I want to sell a house," I said. "This one." And I laid the title on his desk. His eyes studied the paper. Then he nodded. "It is in your name. We can proceed." The sound of his pen scratching across the first form was louder to me than any strike my son ever gave. With each page, the plan unfolded. The listing, the contracts, the trust, the buyers. There was nothing loud or violent in the room, just the slow, steady sound of legality. Where my son had used fists, I used ink. Where he used laughter, I used silence. We arranged it clean and precise. No loopholes, no cracks for him to crawl back through. The sale would be immediate. The ownership would move into new hands without delay. I asked for the money not to return to me alone, but to be divided into a trust for those who had shown me respect. Workers, caretakers, people who had treated me kindly when my own son would not. The lawyer wrote it all carefully, making sure every clause was ironclad. I signed each paper slowly. My hand did not shake. Each stroke of my pen felt like a hammer blow, not against wood this time, but against arrogance. I remembered teaching my son how to hold a hammer, how to build, how to respect the weight of a tool. Now I was showing him the weight of something heavier, a father's quiet justice. By the time the papers were done, I felt lighter. The lawyer shook my hand and said, "It is final." Once the buyers move in, there is nothing he can do. I thanked him and walked out with my coat pulled tight. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I had not raised my voice. I had not struck back. But I had struck something far deeper. I thought of my son at work, laughing with his friends, bragging about his life, sure that his home would always be his. He did not know that at that very hour strangers were walking through the rooms he thought he owned, looking at walls, opening closets, planning where their children might sleep. He did not know that the very house he raised his hand in was already slipping from his grasp. The legal thread was woven tight, and he had no scissors sharp enough to cut it. His fists could not undo signatures. His pride could not erase stamps. His laughter could not rewrite the law. The house was mine to give, and I had given it away. When I returned home that evening, I sat again at the same wooden table. The shoebox was empty now. The title was gone, passed into the hands of law. My face still carried the faint marks of his slaps, but my chest carried something stronger. The knowledge that I had answered humiliation not with rage, but with permanence. He had left marks on my skin. I had taken the ground from under his feet. The day came quietly. He woke in the morning, stretched his arms, kissed his wife on the cheek, and laughed as he left for work. His steps were proud, careless, the same swagger of a man who believed his world was unshakable. He did not glance at me. He did not remember the bruises on my face. He did not even think of the title I still held. To him, the house was his kingdom. To me, it was already gone. Not long after he left, cars began to pull into the driveway. First, the realtor with folders in her hands, then the movers carrying boxes, wrapping furniture, rolling rugs. They walked through the doors he once called his own without hesitation. Strangers stepped into the living room, strangers opened closets, strangers ran their hands along the banisters. His wife came out of the kitchen, her eyes wide, her voice sharp. "What is happening?" she demanded. The realtor handed her the papers. She read, but the words meant nothing to her. "This house has been sold," the woman said calmly. "Please gather your things." Her face drained of color. She shouted, "She called my son." She waved the paper in the air. But the men kept working. Box after box left the house. Table legs were unscrewed, chairs stacked, pictures taken down from the wall. The house filled with the sound of packing tape, the scraping of furniture, the thud of footsteps. Her voice cracked as she called him again and again, but he was at work, too far to stop what had already begun. I stood in the corner, silent, watching. I did not smile. I did not speak. I only watched the life they built on my back being carried out piece by piece. Each box that left the door was not just furniture. It was a lesson. Each rug rolled up was not just fabric. It was the end of their arrogance. The very walls seemed to sigh with relief as they emptied. By noon, the house no longer looked like theirs. The family photos were gone, the shelves bare, the closets empty. Strangers measured the windows for curtains, planned where beds would go, talked about painting colors. The sound of their voices filled the air, while his wife sat on the stairs, shaking, her phone pressed against her ear, whispering frantic words to a man who could not save her. I thought of the night he slapped me 20 times. I thought of her laughter, her smirk. And I thought of how sure they both had been that I was powerless. But here I was, standing steady, while their world was dismantled before their eyes. They had believed cruelty would go unpunished. They had believed arrogance would protect them. But they forgot who held the deed. When the last box was carried out, I stepped outside. The movers loaded the truck. The realtor locked the paperwork in her car. His wife sat by the door, her face buried in her hands. I walked past her without a word. There was nothing left to say. The house was gone, sold while he worked, taken from them as quietly as they had taken my dignity. And as I walked away, I felt no heat, no fire, no triumph. Only peace. Because justice had been done in silence. Evening came, and with it came my son. I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway, the slam of his door, the heavy steps up the walkway. He was laughing on the phone with someone, his voice proud, careless, the way men sound when they think nothing can touch them. The key turned in the lock, but the door did not swing open as he expected. He pushed harder, frowning, confused. Finally, his wife opened it from inside. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She said nothing. She only handed him the papers. He stepped inside and froze. The house was bare. The living room where he once sat with his friends was empty. No couch, no chairs, no pictures on the walls. Just empty floors and hollow echoes. His laughter died instantly. He looked around, his mouth half open, his phone still in his hand. He shouted her name, shouted mine, shouted at the air. His voice filled the empty space, but there was nothing to answer him. He ran from room to room. The dining table was gone. The cabinets were bare. The closet stood open, shelves stripped. Even the rug in the hallway was rolled and carried away. Every step he took brought him more panic. His fists slammed against the walls, his voice cracked into curses. His wife followed behind him, crying now, her words broken. I told you something was wrong. But he would not hear her. He could not. The truth was louder than any excuse. He found me sitting in the kitchen, the one chair left behind, my coat folded neatly over my lap. I did not rise. I did not speak. I only looked at him. He glared at me, his chest rising fast, his fists clenched tight. What did you do? He roared. I said nothing. I pointed to the counter where the realtor had left the final copy of the papers. He picked it up, his hands trembling, his eyes scanning the words he could not change. The rage left his face then, not all at once, but slowly, replaced by something he had never shown me before. Fear. He dropped the papers, stepped back, ran his fingers through his hair. No, he whispered. No, this can't be. His wife leaned against the wall, her face streaked with tears, her voice low. It's gone. The house is gone. He turned back to me, his eyes wide, almost begging. Dad, you can't, you wouldn't. But I already had. His voice cracked, his hands shook, but the silence between us was stronger than his pleading. The silence told him the truth. The silence told him this was final. He tried to argue, tried to shout about rights, about family, about blood. But every word bounced off empty walls. The law had already spoken. His fists could not fight ink. His pride could not undo signatures. His cruelty could not change that the house was no longer his. When the movers returned to finish their work, he tried to block the door, but they showed him the stamped papers. Legal documents are heavier than fists. He stumbled back, helpless, as strangers carried out the last pieces of his life. His wife sank into a corner, silent now, broken. And he stood there, a man stripped of everything, watching his kingdom walk out the door. I rose at last, put on my coat, and walked past him. Our shoulders brushed, but neither of us spoke. I left him there, standing in his own ruin, surrounded by nothing but echoes. The house he thought would always be his had slipped away in a single day. Sold while he worked. Taken while he laughed. Gone before he even understood the power he mocked. The house was gone, but the ruin did not stop at the walls. It spread outward, like ripples on a pond after a stone has been thrown. Word traveled fast, faster than I imagined. Neighbors who once watched from their windows now whispered in small groups by their fences. They had seen him strike me. They had heard the laughter of his wife. And now they saw the trucks, the movers, the strangers carrying furniture out of the door. Some shook their heads, some smirked, some said quietly, he got what he deserved. Friends who once filled his rooms with noise and drink no longer called. They did not answer his messages. They did not return his visits. They had celebrated in his house, eaten at his table, clapped when his wife mocked me. Now, when he needed them, they vanished. Pride does not invite pity. Arrogance does not win allies. He stood alone. His wife, who once smirked as he raised his hand against me, now carried shame heavier than gold. At the store, she tried to pay, but was turned away. People whispered as she left empty-handed. At gatherings, she sat quiet, no longer the woman who laughed the loudest. Her friends distanced themselves, unwilling to stand beside someone who mocked an old man and lost everything in return. Her apologies came in fragments, but they fell flat, spoken too late and too soft. Even at his job, the news followed him. Men he worked with looked at him differently. Some laughed behind his back. Others avoided him, not wanting to be tied to his disgrace. He had once bragged about the house, the furniture, the parties. Now all of that was gone, and so was the respect. His pride had been built on borrowed walls, and when those walls fell, so did his image. The humiliation he gave me spread back to him tenfold. He could not step outside without feeling eyes on him. He could not walk down the street without whispers trailing behind. Every nod, every glance reminded him of the night he struck me and the day his house vanished. What he thought was strength had become weakness. What he thought was power had become shame. I watched from a distance. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. I did not need to. The world was delivering the justice I had set in motion. My silence was louder than his fists now. My decision was heavier than his laughter. He learned the lesson not from my words, but from the emptiness around him. The same neighbors who once saw me as the old man in the worn coat now looked at me differently. Some gave me nods of respect. Some offered quiet words. You did right. They knew the truth without me ever speaking it. They had seen what he did. They had seen what I did, and they knew the balance had been restored. My son, once surrounded by friends and comfort, now stood in ruin. His wife, once proud and cruel, now tasted the bitterness of silence. The social aftershock was not loud. It was slow, steady, and relentless, and it stripped them of everything they once thought untouchable. I walked away with nothing but my coat and a small bag. Yet my chest felt lighter than it had in years. Behind me stood the house I built, now empty of his laughter, empty of his pride, no longer chained to my name. Ahead of me stretched quiet streets, lined with whispers, but this time the whispers were not about my humiliation. They were about my justice. They were about a father who had been struck 20 times, mocked in front of strangers, and yet found a way to answer without raising his hand. The house did not vanish. It still stands. Its bricks still hold. Its roof still keeps out the rain. Its walls still echo. But it no longer belongs to him. It no longer belongs to the son who believed fists could erase 30 years of sacrifice. It no longer belongs to the wife who smirked as she watched him do it. It belongs to strangers now. Strangers who will treat it with respect because they paid for it with their own labor, not with mine. And that is as it should be. I gave my son everything. I gave him the tools to build, the lessons to live, the home to raise a family in. I gave until there was nothing left to give, and in return, he gave me 20 slaps across the face, in front of a woman who laughed. That was his gift. My gift back to him was silence. Cold, unshakable silence. Silence that sold his house while he worked. Silence that emptied his closets. Silence that left him standing in ruins. He will remember that day every time he sees an empty wall. He will remember it every time a neighbor turns away. He will remember it every time he feels the weight of shame pressing on his chest. And he will know it was not anger that ruined him. It was not shouting. It was not fists. It was the hand of the same father he mocked, signing away the very ground he stood on. I still wear my old coat. It keeps me warm. Warmer than the house he lost, warmer than the pride he wasted, warmer than the laughter that once cut me deep. That coat is not shame. It is survival. It is proof that I endured winters he could not survive a single day of. It is proof that I bent but did not break. And now, when I walk the streets, that coat feels lighter, because I carry no humiliation with it anymore. Final thought. He slapped me 20 times on his own floors. I sold those floors while he worked. I watched the life he scorned carried out in boxes, and I left him with nothing but silence. True story.